Hello everyone, in this video we're going to go through the 7 most common mistakes I see in the business management IA. And the purpose of these 7 mistakes are they're ones which I see a lot and they're ones which are fairly easy to correct. So here we go. The first one is including page numbers in the IA. So we look at criterion G, presentation. You can see that you need to put numbered pages into your document. And if you look at criteria, you look for 1 mark out of 2, it says 1 or more of the required elements is missing. So if you forget to put page numbers into the IA, you will lose 1 mark out of 25, which is 4% of your IA score, which is crazy. It's so many marks, it's such a high percentage to lose just for such a simple thing. So make sure you have page numbers, and I see this one all the time. Secondly, on the same criteria, you can see you also need an accurate table of contents. And again, if 1 or more of the criterion is not present, you lose 1 out of 25, which is 4% of your score. So this one's a bit more tricky, but hopefully by now, if you've been following the playlist, you have a table of content. And I almost always see a table of content. However, the key word here is accurate. Is it accurate? And I know I've written essays in the past where you're doing your essay, you do your table of content, and at the end of the essay, you don't go back and change those page numbers. And people marking your IA will check these. They'll say, okay, according to your document, the conclusion starts on page 11. And then you can look through the document, does your conclusion actually start on page 11? So just before you hand it in, go back and check those page numbers to make sure it's accurate. Number 3, and this one is about the supporting documents. So you know that you need 3 to 5 supporting documents, ideally 5. And these go at the back of your IA or in a separate document we'll talk about in a minute. And according to the IB, it says your supporting documents should be dated within 3 years of the date of submission of the IA. So for example, if you're submitting the IA in April 2025, then the document should be no older than May 2022. If you're submitting in April 2028, then the document should be no older than May 2025. And you can see this one here. This is an older document. This is from 2021. I'm recording this video in 2025. So this article is too old. So if I use this in an IA, then I would lose marks because the document is too old. So just double check when you do those 5 supporting documents, are they dated within 3 years of the date of submission of your IA? Number 4, this one sounds obvious. It should be under 1,800 words. So it has to be under 1,800 words or 1,800 words if you like. What happens if it goes over 1,800 words is that basically the person marking it will stop reading. So if your IA is 1,900 words, for example, then somewhere probably during the conclusion, the 1,800 word limit will be hit, and therefore the rest won't be marked, which means that normally the conclusion will get fewer marks because of this. So I think we know to put it under 1,800 words by now, hopefully, but what you might not have seen is the following are not included in the word count. Acknowledgements, which you don't really need. So the table of contents we don't include. Tables of data are not included, diagrams or figures. Equations, formulae and calculations. So if you calculate any ratios, the actual working is not included. Supporting documents, obviously. Citations, so if you're using in-text citation, then you wouldn't use the actual in-text. References and the bibliography. So the key thing here is when you're counting your 1,800 words, not to include any of these. If you did, for example, include your calculations and your calculations were 100 words, then your IA would actually only be 1,700 words, and you're kind of losing words. You want to make sure you use all of your words. 1,800 is really not that many. So when you count the number of words, you need to make sure that you don't include any of these. Otherwise, you won't be using all your words, and then maybe your evaluation won't be deep enough or things like that. Number 5, use the concept throughout the IA. This is so important. The concept is worth 5 marks out of 25 for the IA. It's worth 20% of the IA grade. And the key thing for 5 marks is that you need to use the IA throughout the internal assessment. Now, if you go back to the earlier videos where I talk about the concept in the IA, I go through this in a lot more detail. The key thing here is you need to use the concept in the introduction, you need to use the concept in the main body, and you need to use it in the conclusion. In the introduction, you want to define it and you want to say why it's appropriate for your IA. In the main body, you want to constantly be referring back to it according to your research question and what you found out. And in the conclusion, you then come back to it again and say, from a conceptual point of view, what have you actually found out and how have you answered your research question? This one's a bit more complicated, so go back and have a look at the concept video for more details. Number 6, your evaluation is balance. So what do we mean by balance? So basically, you're looking at both sides of the issue. So reasons why they should, reasons why they shouldn't. So to put that into context, if we had a research question like, to what extent will IKEA's strategy to open more urban stores increase market share in Germany? And during the IA, we need to make sure we look at both sides of the argument. So this is quite a simple one. You want to make sure you have arguments saying, yes, it will increase market share, because that's what the question is looking at. And then you're going to look at questions saying, well, actually, maybe it won't have that much of an impact, or other such arguments. And you want to make sure that you spend kind of a balanced amount of time on both of these. So half of the essay is about arguments for, half of the essay is about arguments against, or rather half of the evaluation part of the essay is about those two. And then during the essay and during your conclusion, you're then going to answer to what extent. So either to a large extent, to a full extent, to some extent, to no extent, etc., etc. Again, the evaluation marks are quite significant in the IA, so this is a really important one. And then finally, following the required structure, again, if you followed a previous video where I talk about how to structure the IA, I go through this in a lot more detail, but the main parts of the IA, you need the title page, you need the table of contents we talked about earlier, you need the introduction, main body, a conclusion, and then the bibliography. And then you also need the supporting documents here. So you need to make sure you have all of those parts within the essay. Again, check my video on how to structure the IA for more details. Now, one other thing you might want to check is that some teachers will ask you to put the supporting documents into a different document. So you're effectively submitting two documents, the IA itself and then the supporting documents in a different document. And the reason for that is that the IAs that are chosen for moderation that get sent to the IB, you actually have to upload two documents. For my students, I get them to upload one document because I just think it's much more simple. If you upload two, it's a bit more complicated. So I get my students to upload it all as one document, and then any that are moderated, then I cut them into two documents, and I do that myself. So check with your teacher whether they want two documents or one document. All right, that's 7 common mistakes I see in the IA. Good luck.